Hi there, this is Amanda from The Happy Homestead. Today, the video you'll be watching is the second video in a 4-part series about home canning for food preservation. So today we're going to dive into water bath canning, and we're going to do that with some tomatillo salsa. So we're going to talk about the ingredients within the actual recipe. We'll go through the recipe with the process, and then we'll begin the process of actually canning our foods. So I want to touch on a couple of different things. I am going to be using the Ball FreshTech electric water bath canner and multi-cooker. Long word, but that's the technical term. I have been water bath canning with a traditional stock pot with a rack for years, and it has worked. Last year, I invested in this electric water bath canner from FreshTech, and I love it. I've used it a handful of times. The reason I love it is it plugs into an electric outlet, and it's actually more efficient in heating the water and getting it up to boiling a lot faster than I had been getting with my stock pot on the stove. The other reason I love it is if I've got a day dedicated to canning, I can have this going on the counter and I can do something else on the stove, whether it be steam canning or pressure canning. So it kind of really makes my options a little bit more available during the day with what I've got going on the stove. Okay, so here is the recipe that we're doing. It is a tomatillo salsa recipe. I printed it. I got this from freshpreserving.com, which is the Ball canning website. There's tons of information on there. You can go there and check out recipes, a lot of recipes, but also tips and how-tos and frequently asked questions. So it's a great resource for things that you might be thinking about your canning journey and how you can begin. So for this recipe, it makes 4 half pints or 2 pints. Now, if a recipe says that, right, then those are the only sizes you can do. So if it says, half pints and pints, I can't say, I'm gonna go do a quart instead. Can't do it that way. Remember, these are tried and tested recipes that you want to follow for safety ensuring reasons. So I'm actually going to do 2 pints, but I'm going to double the recipe and have 4 pints. So the recipe as I read it, this is not doubled. So it's approximately 2 pounds of tomatillos, 1 cup chopped onion, which is about 1 large onion, 1 cup chopped chilies, about 2 medium chilies, and I'm using jalapenos there, 4 garlic cloves minced, 2 tablespoons cilantro minced, 2 tablespoons cumin, there's some salt, red pepper flakes, half a cup of vinegar, and lime juice. Now, this is, like I've mentioned, a water bath canning recipe, and that is because all of the ingredients create a necessary level of acidity that we don't have to go to the higher temperature for heating. We don't have to go to the pressure canning of 240 to 250 degrees, right? We can stay at that 212 degree mark with the boiling water and be safe. So the vinegar helps with that, obviously in the recipe, with keeping everything at a certain acidic level. And make sure that if any recipe calls for the vinegar and the lemon juice, right, that you're using store-bought bottled and not homemade apple cider vinegar, etc., or lemon squeezed from a lemon. You have to be guaranteed the certain level of acidity with that store-bought and manufactured vinegar or acid. Now, for the cilantro, I am actually using dried cilantro. This is organic cilantro from Mountain Rose Herbs. I don't see any problems with it. I don't have fresh cilantro on hand. And because this is going to be basically rehydrated and then canned and stored, the flavor will still come through over time. I'm not concerned. You can absolutely use fresh cilantro, but I find that it's expensive, it doesn't keep very well, and I don't have success growing it. So I keep it on hand in the dried form. Okay, so as far as the recipe, right, so this is the steps, and there's only 5 steps. I picked this recipe because it's good and I wanted to make something that we would enjoy having on hand, but also that's pretty simple. So really prepare the boiling water canner, which all that means is get your water in the pot and get it heated up. Not necessarily to a rolling boil at that moment, but get it warm. It says do not boil, right? So then combine all ingredients in a saucepan. So I'm gonna chop everything up, and it's gonna take some time. This is, by the way, that's usually the longest part of any recipe is like the chopping and the prep work. But I'm gonna combine all the ingredients in a large saucepan. I'm gonna bring them to a boil on the stove and heat and simmer for 10 minutes. And then ladle hot salsa into jars with a 1/2 inch headspace. Remember, we talked a little bit about headspace in video 1. We'll show you that today. Remove any air bubbles, wipe the rim clean so that you have a good seal with your lid. Place the lid on, place the band on, and put it in the canner. And then you process for 15 minutes for 1/2 pints, 20 minutes for pints, adjusting for altitude. So the altitude we're at here is between the 0-1,000 mark. So just make sure you know your altitude and any adjustments that need to happen within canning. So I'm doing pints, so it'll be 20 minutes. And I don't actually start that timer until the rolling boil is going, okay? And then turn off heat, remove lid, let the jars stand in the pot for 5 minutes. Remove the jars, let them cool, check the seals after 24 hours, and done. So I know, sounds like a lot. Let's go through it. Okay, so let's start. The very first thing we need to do before we even begin chopping is we need to get our canner ready with the water in it and the jars heated up. So here is the FreshTech electric water bath canner. The controls are down here. You go all the way to the end to get it to boiling for canning. So inside, if you can see this here, bear with me. Inside here is the rack. Remember I talked about how you need a rack on the bottom of whatever kind of steam or water bath or pressure canning that you're doing so that the hot jars aren't touching the bottom of the hot pan. So there's that. This is a little stopper I need to plug in there for the water. So you actually put your jars in here and then fill it up with water and then turn it on. So that's what we're gonna do right now. Okay, so also on the canner, you'll notice that there is a spigot here. This is such a clever design because basically when you're done water bath canning, you do not want to have to pick up a heavy pot full of boiling hot water and dump it. And sure, you can leave it, and that's what you should do until it cools off. But this device makes it so easy to literally just open the spigot and empty it into your sink. So what I do, because my sink and my kitchen configuration are kind of opposite on how this thing was designed, I will turn it around, and that means the control panel, right, is actually on the other side here. But I'll turn it around and I'll leave the spigot hanging over into the sink so that should anything go wrong, any mishaps at all, and you can't see me very well, that way the water leaks into the sink, okay? So first, let's go ahead and get this filled up. Make sure the stopper in here is tightly engaged so the water doesn't leak out. And start filling it up. Now, we're also going to put our jars in here with it as they are empty. And the reason is because with water, the whole water displacement property, right, is that if you fill the canner up with water, and then once these are full, the water displacement, right, from empty jars to full jars, you'll have plenty enough water in the canner for your jars to be covered. I am putting 5 jars in, 5 pint jars, and that is because when I'm canning, even though a recipe may call for a certain amount, I always want to be prepared with an extra jar ready to go should I need it. Okay, I think that is pretty good. When I stand a jar up, it's really right there at the rim level, right? And with the jars full of water, that should be enough. Yeah, I think we're good. Okay, and if you ever get to the point where you don't have enough, just have a tea kettle ready with some warm or hot water that you can always add to it when the time comes. Okay, so let's put this on. Okay, so I turned it back around the right way with the controls on the front because I really wanted you to see the whole process. So the spigot's gonna go on this side. So I've got to lift it up. Now it is heavy, so you can see how cumbersome it can be. All right, and it fits right on the base. Here's my spigot. I've already got it plugged in back here. I am going to just turn it around because I prefer, like I said, my spigot over the sink. Be very careful while you're doing this, guys. Not so much that you may hurt yourself, but you do not want to damage the appliance. Okay. All right, so my plug's back here, right? I've got the spigot safely over the sink. I am just going to turn it on, and I turned it on to high, not quite all the way, but just enough to get it hot. Okay, so we've got the canner heating up with the jars in it, right? And you want to make sure you have your jars warm and clean, right? Okay. So now we need to chop. This is going to be the hardest part, the most labor-intensive part. I have approximately 5 pounds of tomatillos here. Remember, I'm doubling the recipe. I've got my onions, my limes. Actually, the lime juice is gonna go over here. I took all my spices to the stove, so they are actually gonna go set aside too. So really, we're chopping the tomatillos, the onions, the peppers, and the garlic. Let's get going. Now, if you've never bought tomatillos before, they almost look like a green tomato, and they have this husk that they grow out of. They are delicious. Tomatillo salsa, or salsa, sometimes it's called salsa verde. Salsa verde can vary whether it's a green tomato or a tomatillo, but it is delicious. So I found these on sale. Obviously, I didn't grow these. We are in January. So I didn't grow these right now, but I have grown them before. But I purchased these at our grocery store. They were on sale. And you know, as you get into canning, you are gonna start to get really excited about it and start thinking, oh, what else can I do? What else can I can? And it happens inevitably to everyone at some point who gets into canning, is you just go haywire and you start canning things that you probably wouldn't have eaten otherwise. So that has happened, right? So just a word of caution to make sure you're canning food that you and your family actually want to eat. So these are going to take some time. I am going to peel through these. I'm going to rinse them off in the sink and get them clean, and then I'll begin my chopping. So I have all of the tomatillos cleaned, and I decided while I was washing them, you know what? This is going to take forever to chop. So I'm actually going to roughly chop them and then put them in the food processor. Again, very roughly chopped even in there because we don't want to pulverize them. But to start, I'm going to get the garlic and the onions chopped, and this is the pot I'm going to use to put everything on the stove. So I was thinking, you know, some things that I wanted to make sure you're aware of as you're going through the canning process. Number one, always try to get as fresh ingredients as you can. Because remember, what you're doing is you're storing this for longer term. And if you're not starting with the freshest ingredients and the best quality ingredients, you may not end up with the best quality product. Really just like with any recipe. And I thought about, you know, as far as canning is like why people don't can, and the fear of making their family sick is certainly a valid fear. But again, as long as you're following the directions and using tested recipes, you shouldn't have any problems. Now, if you ever open a jar and it looks off or smells off, then go ahead and dump it. I'll tell you not to scare you, but botulism doesn't have a smell or you know, any visual appearance. I'm not even sure it has a taste. But really, if you're jar is sealed properly, then you should be fine. The other reason I would think people don't do it is because maybe they don't grow their own food and they think that canning is for when you have a large garden and you're growing your own food. And of course, traditionally, that's what it was for, right? For preserving your own harvest. But it doesn't have to be that way today. So you can go to the farmer's market at any point in time in the year, right? When something is in season, and decide that you want to get a great deal and buy it in bulk. My eyes are watering. And preserve it. And canning is just one of the ways that you can preserve those purchases. My eyes are really watering, guys. Oh, goodness. I find being in the kitchen very relaxing and enjoyable anyway. So when I have the ability to do it and not be rushed and not feel stressed out about it, then it just makes it that much more worthwhile, right? And there is a certain level of satisfaction that comes when you open a jar of home canned food and serve it to your family or friends. Yeah. It's something that not everybody will understand and get, but there really is a good level of satisfaction there. All right, onions and garlic are in. I am going to do the jalapenos and the tomatillos. I'm putting gloves on for the jalapenos. This is not something you have to do. I choose to do it because inevitably I rub my eyes or my face when I'm done. It could be 5 hours later. It don't matter. I don't really want to do that again. So whenever I'm dealing with hot peppers, I wear gloves. All right, so what I'm doing is kind of slitting these open a little bit so I can easily get the seeds out. The seeds are where all the heat is. Now, not all of it, right? But I actually don't really want a lot of seeds in my salsa. So I'm going to take those out. You guys might hear the background, the rumble in the background, the slow, low rumble. And that's the canner. It's getting hot. So, for those of you that are probably wondering, what is this? What am I doing? This is our compost bucket. We compost all of our food scraps, eggshells. I used to do coffee grounds. I haven't done them anymore, only because it's French press and they're very watery, so I don't even bother. You can compost paper towels, as long as there's nothing really oily and nasty on them. Tea bags, loose tea. And that's my son's job. Every week he needs to empty the compost bucket for Mommy and Dad. Okay, so we've got these roughly chopped. I'm going to start with these in the food processor. I'm pulsing because I do not want to pulverize, right? That's pretty good. Yeah, the heat. Took a whiff of that. Just saves a little time with the whole chopping thing. All about saving time. Okay. So now our tomatillos. I'll have to do these in a couple of batches. You'll see they really just look like green tomatoes. But if you can see the inside, here, let me come closer, looks a lot different. You can see that. But they're very firm. Again, rough chop. And the food processor will do the rest. Okay, that's the first batch. Let's go ahead and pulse these. That's pretty good. It's a little mashed up, but I think it's gonna be okay. It's gonna cook down anyway a little bit into the Tomatillo Salsa. So let's go ahead and empty this in, and then I am going to, I probably got 2 more batches of this that I will chop up. Everything is chopped and in here. So now we just need to add our spices and the lime juice and the vinegar. So let's go ahead and add that in. So 2 teaspoons ground cumin. The other thing that I really wanted to stress while I'm doing my spices here is there are things that you cannot and should not can. Doesn't matter if it's Waterbath or pressure canning, you shouldn't do it. And that's dairy, anything with dairy. If you see a recipe with milk or cream and then asking you to can it, it's not a good recipe. So no dairy. The other, let's see what else. No grains or pasta. By the way, that was a 1/4 teaspoon salt. You never want to do any type of grain or pasta because it can expand while you're canning it, and it could explode, and then there's and then density issues, right? As far as like a pasta or grain, is the heat permeating through it, right? So those are the reasons why. The other thing is greens. You don't ever want to can like spinach or kale. The texture just doesn't work well. And again, if you it doesn't matter if it's chopped or whole, once it's packed in a jar, it's a density issue. Is the heat permeating through to kill the bacteria? And also, it just would not taste very good when you try to come out and eat it. This is red pepper flakes, 1/2 teaspoon. Okay, 1/2 cup vinegar. The other big no-no with canning, and this would be for pressure canning, is any type of squash that's pureed, or any puree in general. Applesauce is an exception because it's acidic, right? But any type of vegetable that would be pureed, like pumpkin or butternut, you cannot can the puree, but you can cubes. So oftentimes you'll see people canning their pumpkin or their squash, and they cut it in cubes, they load it into the jar, surround it with water, and then you can actually pressure can it. The reason you can do it in chunks or cubes is because with the water surrounding it, the heat gets evenly distributed through the middle, right? So never a puree. If you really want to store your pumpkin with a puree, just freeze it. That's what I do. I don't actually can any squash. Number one, freezing is just as easy. And also, I like the texture better when it comes out of the freezer versus out of the jar in the can. Okay, this is approximately 4 tablespoons of lime juice, but I'm gonna measure it out to be certain here. So there's 1, 2, 3, oh, it's a little more, 4. I'm gonna add 1 more in for good measure. Okay, so we've got all of our ingredients here. Now, I'm gonna get this on the stove, heat it up to a boiling, and then let it simmer for about 10 minutes, and then we'll ladle it into our jars. Okay, so I've got it on the stove. It's heating up. It is definitely getting warm. We're not boiling yet. But y'all, I realized I forgot to add the cilantro when I was putting everything away. So it said 2 tablespoons minced. I'm gonna do the same ratio for the dry, just 2 tablespoons. So let's add that in here. And mix that up. I also added 2 more jars to my canner to be heated up, so I've got 7 in there total. Again, just to be safe, this looked like a decent amount of salsa, and I didn't want to be caught off guard with not having a jar ready to go. But this is looking good. It's smelling even better. So we're just gonna simmer this. It hasn't come quite to a boil yet, but it is pretty close. So I'm gonna give this about 10 more minutes, and then we're gonna jar it up. So we've got our hot jars, our hot salsa. We are gonna start funneling it in. Now the recipe calls for a 1/2 inch headspace. And for me, that's literally just at the bottom of the funnel. There we go. So I am gonna wipe, ooh, it's hot, all of the rims clean and then get the lids on. But I'm gonna get everything jarred up first. Now, when you're doing this, you do not have to rush through it, but at the same time, you do not want to be slow, and take your time and stop and go do something else. Oops, wrong one. That actually looks a little too much. That's better. And remember, I doubled this recipe. So the recipe was for 2 pints or 4 1/2 pints. So I doubled it because if I'm gonna do it again, if I'm putting the work in, I want it to be worthwhile in my time. Because doing 2 pints versus however many pints I'm gonna get today doesn't really change the amount of time within the recipe. And it doesn't change the processing time either. So I'm just taking a clean cloth and wiping all of the rims because you don't want any food particles to prevent the seal from occurring. There's 2 here. And so when you're tightening them, you are just finger tightening them. All right, this is where this thing comes in handy. So you can do this. You don't need to do the whole strongman competition with these things, but they need to be on tight and not loose. Okay, so now I'm gonna put these back in. All right, all of our jars are, oh nope, one more. All of our jars are in. Guys, we ended up with 8 pints, which is so awesome. Very excited about that. So our water level is good. Now we don't start the processing time. I'm gonna turn this all the way up. We don't start the processing time until this is at a rolling boil. And this is something that goes on top just to keep all of the jars steady. Put the lid on. And as soon as you start seeing this a rolling boil, start the processing time. And remember, this processing time is 20 minutes. So we did it. We canned some Tomatillo Salsa. There were a couple of things that I noticed off camera and I wanted to bring them to light here. Number one, I didn't double the vinegar, the lime juice, or the spices. So I did that before I canned them up, jarred them up, and put them in a canner, and I forgot to mention that before. But yeah, as I was going through, I was like, oh, I need to double this also. So I made sure I had the proper ratios. Also, I wanted to note, right, so we ended up with 8 pints, which is awesome. I kept my receipt when I purchased some things, and so I took some notes. And I just wanted to go through it here with you so you can see the value in money you can save when you can food. So the tomatillos, they were the most expensive. They were $10.30, and they were approximately, like I said, 5 pounds. Jalapenos were $1. And by the way, the jalapenos, I only used 4 of them and there were 6 within that pack for the $1. So I still have 2 left. Limes, I bought 6 limes. I only used, I think, 3.5. And that was $2.34. And then I had the spices on hand, right? I had the onion, I had the garlic, I had the vinegar. So I did not count that, but I added in $5 if you ever needed to buy, or you needed to buy some of those things, like cilantro, you might want to buy that, or the garlic or the vinegar. So I did $5. So the total came to $18.63. Now if you divide that out by 8, because we got 8 pints, it came to $2.33 a jar. So I would love for you to think about where, and I'm not saying it's not possible, because of course it's possible, but where you could buy a pint of salsa, whether it be tomatillo or regular salsa, made with organic and all natural ingredients, right? No sugar and nothing artificial, no artificial flavors or coloring or preservatives, for $2.33. So think about that. That's what has driven me, because we have saved a lot of money by canning our own foods. So that's another benefit that may work for you and your family as well. I hope this was helpful. I realize it was a lot going on and I did my best to capture everything the right way on camera. I am not a camera person and I'm not a professional. This is my kitchen. It's not a studio. So I hope it worked. I hope you're able to see how to go through the process. And we'll go to the next part, the third part of the video next time, where we're actually going to be making some blackberry jam. And we're going to be using the Ball jam maker and the steam canner. So you can see a different way to water bath can with the steam canner. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please let me know. I know I probably didn't cover all of your hesitations or questions. So reach out to me and I'm happy to answer. Thanks so much. Stay healthy, stay well, and I'll see you next time. Guys, it's been 24 hours. The salsa is set. I've already put some of it away. But I wanted to show you the next steps, right? After you're done processing and it's cooled, then what? So you're gonna take your rings off. But before I took my rings off, I actually wrote on it what it was, as well as the month, see if that can focus, the month and the year that was processed. The reason you do this is you think in your mind, you're like, oh, I am so gonna remember this. because you're so excited about it, and at that moment you know what this is, you know what you did. But 8 months from now you're going to be like, all right, I'm pretty sure this is salsa, but I don't remember when I did it. Right? So it's really important that you write on the lid what you did, right? What's in the jar, as well as the month and the year that you processed it. This also helps for 2 other really important reasons. Number 1, it allows you to pull from your stock from oldest to newest, right? So I'd want to pull this last if I have salsa still in the pantry that I did last summer. And the second reason is once you write on the lid, then you'll know not to reuse that lid. That's one of the ways, the tricks that I do it. So I know that if the lid has been written on, then it's been processed. Because again, after it's been through the dishwasher and whatnot, if you're saving the lid to reuse for dry goods, you may not be able to tell if you didn't write on it. So that's the other reason. So we're going to take these rings off. And the last thing I want to leave you with, that's very important here, is when you're storing and stocking your jars. It is perfectly fine to obviously stock them near each other, right, on a shelf. Don't ever do this. And it is for the same reason that we don't store the rings on, because you could have a false seal. Number 1, you don't want all the weight coming onto the lid. It could actually pop the seal at any given time depending on how much weight's on it. But you also don't want to store it that way and then eventually go use it and you think that this has been sealed properly. Because what happens is if a seal is going to go bad, a lid's going to go bad, it's going to happen very inconspicuously, right? Like you're not going to notice until you go pull that jar off the shelf and you'll note that the lid is loose, right? So don't ever store things like that. Now you could do this. You could do things kind of alternate, right? But I still don't even do that. And if you were to do that, I would do this with a smaller jar up here, not the same size. So if at all possible, store your jars single layer in your pantry.